Excellent. Welcome, everybody, to the February 2022 book club meeting for the Detroit Writing Room. I'm obviously not Stephanie Steinberg, but I have the distinct honor of serving in her absence as she tends to her new baby daughter. So she sends her well wishes, but of course, she's enjoying that very precious experience. You are all here tonight to have the honor and pleasure of hearing our guest author, Jean Alicia Elster. She's a highly regarded, celebrated, award-winning author and former lawyer, and I am about to introduce her. So while we do that, I would love for you to all please put your introductory information in the chat so we can get to know who you are and we can have a very robust, spirited discussion this evening. And I hope you all walk away enriched by Jean's insights and talents. So let me get to introducing so that you can know all about her beautiful accomplishments. She is a 2017 Kresge Artist Fellow in Literary Arts. She's also a former attorney, having earned her law degree at the University of Detroit School of Law. She has a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Michigan. And the book that she's going to be talking about tonight, the young adult book, How It Happens, is her 7th book, although she's edited and ghostwritten many others. She also, one of her books is her young adult novel, How It Happens, like several of her books, is published by Wayne State University Press, and it was released back in September of 2021. She's also the author of The Colored Car, a book that's for children ages 8 and older, also published by Wayne State Press, released in 2013. The Color Car was really, really celebrated in that it was selected as a 2014 Michigan Notable Children's Fiction selection for the Midwest Independent Publishers Association. It was also chosen as an honor book for the 2014 Patterson Prize for Books for Young People. Jean Alicia Elster also is the author of a novel called Who's Jim Hines, also for kids ages 8 and older, and also published by Wayne State University Press. This one released in August of 2008. That book was selected as one of the Library of Michigan's 2009 Michigan Notable Books. In addition, the Michigan Reading Association placed Who's Jim Hines on the Great Lakes Books Award for 2009 and 2010 for kids who are in grades 4 and 5. It was also a Forward Magazine 2008 Book of the Year Award finalist in the juvenile fiction category. She's also the author, and the list goes on, of Jojo in the City. It's a children's book series published by Judson Press, and the series includes books called Just Call Me Jojo, I Have a Dream Too, I'll Fly My Own Plane, and I'll Do the Right Thing. She was awarded the 2002 Governor's Emerging Artist Award by ArtServe Michigan in recognition of the series. And in 2004, I'll Do the Right Thing received the Atlanta Daily World Atlanta Choice Award in the category of children's books. So her Kresge Artist Fellowship is one of many, many awards that Jean has won. And as you can see by her very impressive repertoire of books, it's understandable why she's so highly regarded and celebrated. So I introduce to you tonight, Jean Alicia Elster.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I really appreciate a very warm welcome. And I love seeing all the book club members that are here tonight. I know the session is being recorded, but it's always nice to see face to face on the screen as live as we're going to be now during these times. So thanks so much. I wanted to start by talking a little bit about that the book, the current book, How It Happens, was germinating within me for many, many years. And I start in the prologue discussing, and you can tell when I read in the prologue just how long certain things in this book have been on my mind. So I'm going to read a bit from the prologue and then jump to a little reading, a little section of the book that ties in. Grandma, are you white? It's one of my earliest memories as a toddler, standing in my grandparents' kitchen, looking up at my grandmother's face as she sat at the kitchen table and asking her if she's white. I had no idea what I was asking or what that term white meant when it was applied to another person. Obviously, I knew that her skin was very much lighter, brighter, my grandmother would say, than my brown skin. And I had also obviously heard that word bandied about as adults talked around me. But at that age, I had no concept of race or ethnic heritage. I just knew she looked different from the other family members that I interacted with. I also did not know this. Her color represented a vivid reminder of the history of racial relationships in the American South as it relates to the sexual interactions between Blacks and whites and the resulting offspring that did often come from those unions. That history is fraught with complexities. This book begins in the post-Reconstruction era of American history, in the year my grandmother was born, in 1890 in Clarksville, Tennessee. It incorporates many of the snippets of family and social history that my grandmother shared with me while I was a young child and later while growing up. As a child, I did not know the meaning of or the social and familiar impact of many of the seemingly innocuous tales she shared with me. But what became clear to me as I reached adulthood and began to truly absorb much of what she had told me was that even though those post-Reconstruction race laws have since the 1960s been repealed or struck down by judicial venues all the way up to the United States Supreme Court, the effects of the race-based societal and sexual double standards and injustices that emanated from those laws are still an ingrained part of our American culture. The results will continue to be felt in this country for generations to come. I'm going to read a bit now from chapter 1. Several days later in the late afternoon, Eddie arrived at Tom Mitchell's door at the end of the hallway to clean his room. She knocked perfunctorily, and not expecting him to be there because it was not yet evening, she walked right in. Addie gasped when she saw Tom Mitchell sitting at his desk. She almost dropped the basket she held in her hand. If Mrs. Beatty finds out that one of her boarders was still in his room when I entered, Addie quickly blurted out an apology. I'm sorry, Mr. Mitchell. I'll come back later. She immediately backed out of the room, ready to close the door. Nonsense, Tom Mitchell said, putting his pen in the inkwell as he spoke. You don't have to do that. You can straighten up while I'm here. I'll be working at my desk. Yes, sir, she said. She glanced over her shoulder and looked down the hall to see if anyone was watching her, but no one was there. She re-entered his room, closing the door behind her. Addie did not dare look over at Tom Mitchell as he sat at his desk, but she did not have to look at him to know that even though he was sitting there, he was not working. She could feel the force of his gaze upon her while she worked. He was staring at her while she moved about his room, and she knew it. She finished her work as quickly as she could. She just wanted to get out of that room and away from that man. Alone with a white man in one of her rooms? I just hope Mrs. Beatty never finds out. She'll have my job for sure. She quickly gathered Tom Mitchell's clothes up off the floor, his shirt and collar, his nightshirt and drawers, and filled the basket. There, now I'm finished. She felt a wave of relief. Then, looking down at her basket, Addie walked toward the door, but just as she was started to pass Tom Mitchell, he reached out from where he sat at his desk and grabbed her arm firmly. Addie gasped and briefly held her breath, her eyes fixed on the basket. Oh my God, her body tensed. What's he gonna do? What's he gonna do to me? I had heard about what my grandmother called the judge, even though he wasn't a judge. He was the youngest elected attorney general in the state of Tennessee. But I had heard about this judge all my life, from when I was a young child, how he purchased all of her school books and supplies. Every fall, she would get them, they would be wrapped in brown paper and tied up, and they would be left at her door by a delivery person. How she had the first treadle sewing machine owned by a private residence in Clarksville. How her father worked hard for this judge. And he worked so hard because the judge promised him he would remember him in his will. And I heard about what happened at the reading of the will. So when I became old enough to really think about these things, and then later on, as I decided to write a book about this, my husband, who's an historian, traveled to the genealogical library in Clarksville, Tennessee. Actually, it was in Montgomery County, where Clarksville is. Now, any of you who are from the South know that genealogy is very, very big in the South. And so most counties, if not cities, have a genealogical library. And in fact, I got such good information there that I thanked the genealogist at the time, Tim Pulley. He was the supervisor there, because my husband emailed him and told him what we were doing, gave him a few family names. And so when we arrived, he had a trove of information, census records, birth records, and he actually had the will. And it was when I read that will and it said, Willie Jackson, my porter, that's when it hit me. I knew I had hit pay dirt, because this validated everything that my grandmother had told me. All of the stories that she said surrounding that. When I saw my grandfather's name, actually my great-grandfather's name there in the will, that cemented what I was going to do in the book. So it allowed me to explore the complex circumstances whereby the very prominent son of a white family could leave part of his estate to the Black husband of the Black woman who bore that white man's 3 daughters. So knowing that, I want to read another portion of the book. This is toward the end of the book. I'm trying not to do any spoilers, but I just want to show you how this part of the story came together in this part of the book. Mama said, "Who is that knocking at the front door? Folks around here know how to come around to the back door. Lord have mercy." I watched Mama get up from the table and go up to the screen door. "Why, Mrs. Wilson, good evening," she said. "How are you? I wasn't expecting you." I know. Forgive me for coming out of the blue like this," Raylene said to Mama. "But I wanted to thank you for the jars of food you sent over the other day. That was mighty generous of you." Raylene was standing at the door, and Mama said something like, "Glad to share what we have, Mrs. Wilson. Won't you come in for a bit?" Mama unlatched the door to let the woman in, and as soon as Raylene stepped into the living room, I could see her eyes get all big and wide. She looked around the room. Mrs. Ford, you sure do have a lovely home," she said to Mama. Mama thanked her and said, "Let's just go on back to the kitchen." And then as Mama led Raylene into the dining room, I could see the woman stop in front of the china cabinet. She put her hand up to her mouth, and then she said, "Lord have mercy, I can see myself in all that silver. Look at that, just like a mirror. I didn't know colored folks had anything this nice," she said. "Never in my life." Her head twitched even faster as she leaned in closer to the cabinet. "Mrs. Wilson," Mama said to her, "just follow me into the kitchen." I could see how Raylene's face had changed after looking at those silver pieces. She got a scrunched up look about her, almost a mean look, and her head was twitching up a storm. When she walked into the kitchen, she looked straight at me, but didn't say a word. I moved over to the stool next to the stove and sat there. Mama motioned for Raylene to take a seat at the kitchen table. Raylene shook her head. No, I can't stay. I just wanted to come by and thank you for the jars, Raylene said. The words were polite enough, but now her tone of voice was cold. You're most welcome, Mama said. Then Raylene said, some women said your husband runs a trucking business. Yes, that's right, Mama said, the Douglas Ford Wood Company. They said he has his own drivers. Yes, Mr. Ford hires his drivers from the men in the neighborhood, Mama said. My Harry's good with a tractor. I know he'd be good with a truck. Could you ask your husband if he could hire him to drive one of his trucks? Well, Mrs. Wilson, Mama answered, he doesn't need any drivers now. I don't want to know what you think, Raylene said, her words short and clipped. I want to hear it from your husband. Excuse me, Mama asked. You're mistaken if you think you can come into my home and what? You think just because you have light skin and straight hair that you can talk down to me? Raylene said. Her voice was getting pretty loud. Living here with all that nice furniture and all that silver, just like a white person, she said. Her right shoulder was twitching now, along with her head. Mrs. Wilson, please don't talk that way in front of my daughter. I can say what I want, Mrs. Ford. Not in my house, you can't, Mama said, raising her voice. You think just because you look white? Mrs. Wilson, I think it's time for you to leave. I'll go when I'm good and ready, Raylene said, her head twitching so bad she could barely get the words out. Mama reached back and grabbed the poker that was laying on the stove. You do not come into my house and talk like that, especially in front of my daughter, she said, holding the poker at her side. Oh, yes, I can. And I can say what anybody looking at you can see plain as day, that some white man took your mother, that. But before Raylene could finish her sentence, Mama stepped forward quickly, raised the poker above her head, and whacked it across the kitchen table, right next to Raylene. Raylene screamed. I screamed. Now you get out of my house before I let this poker fall across your head, Mama said in a low voice. Patsy, Lord have mercy, I don't think I'd ever seen Mama that angry before, ever. Oh, Lordy, don't kill me, was all Raylene said. Why, she even stopped twitching after Mama hit that poker across the table. And you leave out the back door, the same door you should have come through to begin with, Mama said. Raylene ran out of the kitchen and through the back door. Mama followed close behind, the poker still in her hand. Help, help, I'll call the police, Raylene said. Go on, call the police, but first you get off my property, I heard Mama say. Jean looked at Patsy and leaned back against her chair. And Mama never said another word about what happened that day. Never. But Raylene's words, some white man took your mother, they stuck with me. I guess because when Raylene said what she said, that's when Mama whacked the poker across the table, scared me to death. I didn't know what those words meant. And that poker left a mark on the table. Even though I could tell Mama or maybe Daddy tried to smooth it out sometime after that. But I could still tell where that mark had been. And sometimes when I looked at it, I remembered what Raylene said. Wasn't until I got older and learned about the way of things, between a man and a woman, that I understood what Raylene meant and why Mama got so angry. What it all meant about Mama's color and Grandma Jackson. Okay, so that is how I kind of tied together some of the stories that I heard from my grandmother. Elizabeth mentioned the two books that were published by Wayne State University Press, and Who's Jim Hines and The Colored Car both took place in the mid-1930s. But I like to call How It Happens both a prequel and a sequel to those books, because in both of them, I do mention how the mother, Dorothy Mae Jackson, could have passed for white. And in a couple of portions of both of those books, I talk about her light skin and just certain passages of those, it comes up. So I wanted to talk about just where that color came from and how her father, her biological father, was white. And she had two sisters. And so I talk about that in post-Reconstruction, how it happens when they're still in Clarksville. And then also the children, the four children in those two books, most of my readers at some point they ask, well, what happened to them? And so also in how it happens, I talk about post-World War II Detroit and those four children, either their late high school years, but primarily their years at Wayne State University, being students there. And I focus on Jean Ford, who was my mother, and just her time in Detroit and just how she deals with the racism during that day and how she deals with certain aspects of her mother and deals with the color aspect of it. So I kind of, as I said, call it a prequel and a sequel, trying to tie the three books together. But how it happens is a young adult, because I do deal with the racial dynamics, as I say, and as it says on the back of the book, race, miscegenation, class, sexual assault, all of those things I bring up in the book. There's no explicit sex, so I hope that's not a spoiler for anyone, but there are a couple of pregnancies, and everyone will know just what happened and how it happened. That's kind of like the title of the book. So, and I do bring up, and I'll read a little bit more from the prologue, and because I want to make it clear my thoughts about just what happened with that encounter. Banned intimate relationships in the race laws occurred between, when they occurred between white men and Black women, the dynamic was altered considerably, because beginning with the time of Black enslavement in America, when Blacks were considered the owner's chattel or human property, white men, even those who did not own enslaved women, could force a Black woman to submit to an intimate relationship without fear of ever facing the consequences of having broken one of those race laws. Now, any sexual encounter that occurs without the consent of one of the parties, or that occurs after a party says no, is rape, period. And even more compelling are those instances when a party is afraid to say no, or when they know that saying no is not an option. It is still rape, and the situation and its consequences become all the more chilling. So I wanted to make sure that that was brought up in the book. And so those who are reading the book just know where I stand as an author regarding what took place between Dorothy Mae's mother and, I call him, Tom Mitchell in the book. This has been a marvelous evening. I've really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the comments and questions, and thank you, Elizabeth, you did a marvelous, and can't imagine anyone else doing this moderating. So I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And
thank
you all. Spread the word, please, if you enjoy the book.
And please, you can visit her website at AliciaElster.com. I put it in the chat.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And thank you, Jean. Thank you, all of you, for joining us this evening for what I hope was an enriching and insightful experience. And I hope you're looking forward to the next book club meeting here at the Detroit Writing Room. So I'm Elizabeth Ann Atkins, honored to sit in for Stephanie Steinberg, who is at home with her new baby girl. So have a wonderful evening, and I wish you happy reading and happy writing.